Ecclesiastes, chapter 6. We're making our way through this book. For those of you who may not be familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes, it's Solomon's letter or Solomon's book trying to describe what life would be like without God. If you remove God from your life, what kind of existence would you have? And it's pretty desperate. One of the darkest books in all the Bible. In fact, chapter 6 is considered by some to be the darkest chapter in all the Bible. Mostly because, you're going to hear it in verse 2, really early on. We'll read the whole chapter in just a minute. Carol Jacobus is going to do that. But what I want you to really hear out of this is that contentment is a gift from God. This last week, we had an event that took place here in America that captured the interest of a lot of people, trying to win over $600 million. And if there wasn't a winner this week, it was going to go up close to $1 billion. Why? There's a quote that I have. I don't think it made it in your sermon outline, but I'm going to read it to you now because it seems like an appropriate time to read that as we get ready to read this text. This is from David Jeremiah. He says this: "One study claims that instant millionaires have about the same level of happiness as accident victims." Let me read that to you again. David Jeremiah, he's a pastor who used to be in Fort Wayne, now on the West Coast. "One study claims that instant millionaires have about the same level of happiness as accident victims." Now, obviously, there are millions and millions and millions of people in America that have not got that memo. Otherwise, there wouldn't be $600 million lotto winners. But folks, in my limited experience with people who have won the lottery, I found it to be true. And as I read story after story after story of mega million winners, in fact, Brad and I were talking today during the first service that didn't happen, how it just would completely disrupt your life to have that major of a change happen all at once. And you say, well, I'd be willing to put up with that. Then you're betraying yourself. And hopefully by the time we get done with the day, you'll understand why I say that. Listen very, very carefully as Carol Jacobus comes and reads from Ecclesiastes chapter 6, the entire chapter.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Please stand for the reading of the Holy Scriptures. Reading in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. "I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives man wealth, possessions, and honor, or so that he lacks nothing in his heart's desires, but God does not enable him to enjoy them, and a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. A man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning. It departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place? All man's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This, too, is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man has been known, no man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a man in life during the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he's gone? The reading of a word. You may be seated.
Thanks, Carol. Such a happy text, huh? Merry Christmas. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too after hearing this text. But please understand, this is actually a great Christmas present that the writer of Ecclesiastes is bringing to you. Because he's helping you to understand the value of the gift that you've been given. I don't know how many of you have given a gift to a young person that may be very, very young, and it was a very valuable gift. And they never knew how valuable it was until much later on when they've either sold it or trashed it or done something stupid with it. And then later on in life realize, holy cow, what an idiot I was to have this very, very precious gift. When I was very, very young, 19, 20, which at the time, unfortunately, I had the mentality of about a 13-year-old, my parents gave to me a crystal platter that was a gift from my great-grandmother on my mom's side of the family. It's a weird little scene of an Egyptian person. We have it in our fireplace. Egyptian-type person sitting. It looks kind of weird, but very, at least sentimentally, very, very valuable. Now, I got it as a young person, and I thought, well, that's kind of dumb. And now I realize what a very, very precious gift that was. Kind of like a lot of parents buying their 16-year-old a brand new car. I never could understand that. Never mind. You've been given a great gift, and Christmas is when we celebrate the giving of that gift. And if we never understand what the gift really entails, we'll never appreciate it properly. So the writer of Ecclesiastes has gone out of his way to bring you to the forefront, to put your face in the mirror and allow you to see firsthand how great this gift that God has given you. Otherwise, this is how your life would be as the book of Ecclesiastes. This is what you'd be facing. But unfortunately, here in America, we live in the umbrella, under the umbrella of God's providence. We really have been a blessed nation. It's not an accident that we sing God Bless America, the seventh inning of most home games, the bottom of the seventh, because we really have been blessed. And unfortunately, we've been blessed so long, we forgot about it. So, what is Koheleth trying to tell us? If you want to follow along in your sermon outline, this is what it looks like. Should have been in your service folder. Here we go. What is Koheleth? That's another name for the writer of Ecclesiastes. Why does Koheleth keep hammering away at man's discontentment and lack of satisfaction with our meaningless, empty, and futile life under the sun? Remember, there's two perspectives that the writer of Ecclesiastes has given us. There's life under the S-U-N sun, which means life without God. Take God completely out of the picture, which we're trying to do here in America now. Take God completely out of the picture, and this is what you have. And that's what the writer of Ecclesiastes is doing, showing us what life under the S-U-N is like. But then he gives you glimpses from time to time of what life would be like under the S-O-N, under Jesus. Now, Koheleth didn't know anything about Jesus other than he was the promised one, and really didn't know his name, didn't ever have exposure because 1,000 years before. Well, 900 years before. So he never had contact with Jesus, but he knew that the promised one was coming. That's why he could write with authority what the book of Ecclesiastes, because he knew there was something more coming down the pike. And that's what we have, that we live in almost in ignorance of, because it's so much a part of our lives, we don't even realize what gift God has given to us. And maybe one of these days we'll be forced to realize what we had, but it's like the song back in the 60s, you won't know what you've got till it's gone. So, why does Koheleth keep hammering away at man's discontentment? I believe the answer is this. Koheleth is trying to force you to ask the questions of yourself. What would it take to have significance in your life? I don't know about you all, but I ask that question on a regular basis. And here's the real dinger. Dinger? Sure. Here's the real dinger. What would you rather have? $1 billion and no contentment or peace, or nothing at all with full contentment and peace. That is a trick question intended to expose where you're really at and the source of your discontentment. And I know people who would say, give me the $1 billion, I'd like to risk it. That's not the deal. How you answer that question will go a long way to assisting you to find what you are looking for, and will also be credible evidence of your spiritual maturity or lack of it. And folks, this last week's lottery is evidence to me that spiritual immaturity runs rife in our country. Thinking that $600 million will buy contentment. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's why the word for the day is content. Not content, but content. I went out of my way to put the accent on the tent. Because content is exactly the antithesis of what we're talking about. It's not what you have. It's not the contents of your possessions that's going to make you happy. That's going to give you satisfaction. That's going to give you contentment. It's being content because you know you're loved. You know that your needs are going to be provided for. You know that you have a future and a hope. This last week, we had our XYZ party. Some of you who were at that party know that contentment was not the prevailing word. They play a cutthroat game of gift-giving swaps, which means you draw a number, and number one, I was number one, which is the absolute worst position to be in. Number one draws his gift, and then number two can either take number one's gift, or you've done those? You should see some of those folks. Never content with the present that they got. Always look. Some of those gifts, my wife's peanut brittle got traded at least 7 or 8 times. Wasn't it, baby? I tried to get it. But I know where the author lives, so. I'd like you to think about working with some type of definition like this for the word discontent. Being uneasy or disturbed because one knows things should be better than they are. Now, here's the catch. Let me read it again. This isn't your sermon outline. This came on Friday. The sermon outline gets printed on Thursday. So there's 2 things I'm going to ask you to add to your sermon outline that I don't have, only because the Lord was testing me by giving it later than the deadline. Discontent, being uneasy or disturbed because one knows things should be better than they are. But here's the question I'd like to put before you in regard to our discontentment. Do you know? Do you really know things should be better? Do you really know what it's going to take to make things better? My contention is we don't have a clue what it's going to take in order for us to find contentment, to find happiness, to find satisfaction. It's a gift from God. And we're not talking about contentment like Elsie the cow. Some of you may remember back about 40 years ago that on TV they had this cow, and Borden was selling its dairy products with this because all of their cows were contented cows. How do you remember that? Good, I'm not the only one on the planet who remembers that. And the whole commercial was how superior their product was because they were contented cows. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking a mindless contentment that a cow has. Listen, I used to watch cows go up contented to the place where they go, pow. That's not what we're talking about. And we're not talking about the contentment that one deacon at a church had when the pastor went to the deacon and said, Listen, I think we're really struggling here with either ignorance or apathy. What's going on with our church? And the deacon said, I don't know and I don't care. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about ignorance. We're not talking about apathy. We're not talking about a mindless contentment. We're talking about being content and yet fully aware of everything that's out there. Fully aware of all the pleasures and all the desires that are in our heart, and yet we know we haven't yet achieved them, but know that one day we will. And that's the hook. Because our discontentment comes in wanting them now when it's not possible now. This is good stuff. Okay, here we go. 3 points on both the introduction to chapter 6 and also in the conclusion. Then we'll go home and celebrate Christmas Sunday before Christmas. 1, there is no contentment when God gives you everything but doesn't allow you to enjoy anything. Look what he says in verses 1 and 2. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on men. God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing his heart desires. But God does not enable him to enjoy them. And a stranger enjoys them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. Goes on to talk about being a rich man, talk about being a man with a lot of children, talk about being buried properly, talking about living a long life. Those were all the epitome of what it means to have success in the ancient world. To have lots of children, to live long, to receive a proper and honorable burial was the epitome of status. And today it would mean having a 60-foot yacht with a beach condo in Fort Lauderdale or someplace like that, and having another home somewhere else and being the six-figure income as a CEO of some major corporation. That would be the equivalent today of what this guy enjoys. But he doesn't enjoy it. And folks, you've all heard the stories of people who seem to have everything. One of the movies that I saw, it was early on. I can't remember if I was in high school or in college or wherever, but I remember seeing the story, and in fact, I can still picture Howard Hughes was a story about Howard Hughes. And I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but at the end of his life, he gets really, really weird. So much so that he wouldn't allow people in and out of his room because he was trying to keep it sterile environment. He collected all of his urine so that he didn't have exposure to the outside world, and in this room was jars of urine all around. Listen, he was a multi-billionaire. You ought to watch that movie. How many of you have seen the movie about Howard Hughes? Yeah, he had it all. Power, status, great reputation, money, anything he wanted, but couldn't enjoy any of it. Why? Because the God of the universe is trying to force us to come to himself. That is the only place we'll find contentment. And if we go after things that will only lead us away from the God of the universe, he puts an emptiness in our hearts to help us to realize, well, this isn't going to work. I got to try something else. I've told you during our series on Ecclesiastes the number of sports heroes that win the Super Bowl or win the World Series or win an Olympic gold medal, and a month later have holes in their lives. They're just empty. Trying to figure out, what do I need to do in order to find contentment? It's a gift. It's a gift God gives when you're on the right track, in order to allow you to continue in the direction you need to go in order to find him. I was reading a book by James D. Kennedy this last week in preparation for Tuesday's message. It's kind of a spoof off of White Christmas. Remember in White Christmas, Jimmy Stewart character gets a chance to be able to see what the world would be like if he never was born. What was his name? Bailey. It's a Wonderful Life. What did I say it was? I've been watching the movie with Gene and I got wrong one. Well, I'm glad you guys are on top of it. You just should preach your message. It's a wonderful life when it gets a chance to be able to see the world if you'd never been born. This book was called, What If Jesus Had Never Been Born? Amazing. Just amazing. All the things that in our world have been changed, all the attitudes, all the sympathies, all the worldviews that have been changed because Jesus was born. And as I was reading, he was talking about art and music and how art and music has changed radically as a result, especially if you look at the Renaissance and all the great advances that came in art and music during that particular time, through the Baroque period, into the Renaissance, and even up until the 1800s, late 1800s. Then all of a sudden something changed about 1870, 1890. Professor Turner would love to tell you all about the change. All of a sudden, art and music became more disjointed. Haven't you looked at art pieces? There's a great story about, remember, Get Smart? Maxwell Smart. He's looking at a piece of artwork and explaining why this white dot in a frame is so significant. It's to draw your attention in and help you to know the focus and meaning of life. Isn't that white dot strategically placed? And all of a sudden the fly that was a white dot flies away. Then he doesn't know what the picture's about. Some of you are just now catching on. Folks, haven't you done that with artwork? Look at it and go, what is this? And then you want to do this. Why? Art and music reflects our culture. It always has, it always will. And if you look at art and music today, a lot of it is so abrasive and harsh. It's so contorted and distorted. Why? Because we're a discontent people. It's reflecting our souls and we don't even know it. It's betraying who we are. We've become a people desperate to find order and beauty and meaning. And our art is reflecting none of that because we don't have it. It's because we're looking in the wrong places. 2, there is no contentment wherever desire trumps reality. Look what he says in verses 7 through 9. All men's efforts are for his mouth, yet his appetite is never satisfied. What advantage has a wise man over a fool? What does a poor man gain by knowing how to conduct himself before others? Better what the eye sees than the roving of the appetite. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. You know, there's a phrase that goes along with this. A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. How many have ever heard that phrase? Let me tell you why that sets me on edge every time I hear that phrase. Do you remember why? Oh, yeah. My wife is really smiling at this point. When I was early on dating Jean, her father was trying to talk her out of dating me. I was a yippie. It's kind of a sophisticated hippie. Isn't that right, baby? I did have long hair, just only on my shoulders. Some of you are finding this hard to believe, aren't you? But he knew my sister who attended Jean's church, and my sister is, you remember, Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. And so on the merits of my sister, I had some status with her family. I was just a yippie. But Jean had boyfriends at the school that she attended all over the place. And so he was trying to make sure that she didn't have a broken heart by saying, you know, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. Basically meaning, I don't care if you think this Porter guy is worth twice as much risk. You've got one already back at the school. Why not just dump this Porter guy and get rid of it? So that's why this particular phrase does not sit well with me. But there's a lot of truth in the phrase. Sometimes we look for the grass that's greener on the other side of the hill or other side of the fence, when in reality, when you get over there, it's not green at all. And part of what the writer of Ecclesiastes is getting us to realize is, why do you keep chasing? It's meaningless. It's empty. That is not where you find satisfaction. We have, in our culture, We've made it an art form to create discontent. Advertisers spend millions of dollars to try to find out what triggers your discontentment button, because that's how they sell products to you. Don't fall for it. One of the tricks, or what, not trick, one of the exercises that I would do periodically with my children, more so with Jake than with Jody with Jody, but more with Jake and with Julie, because I learned later on in life, when my kids got older, how valuable it was for me to portray this to my kids. But we would watch commercials, and I would try to point out the defective message in the commercial. What they were trying to get you to buy their commercial, what vice there was in our human heart, what weakness there was in our human heart, what depravity there was in our human heart. That was the hook that they were trying to get to sell their product on through their language or whatever. Folks, that's a good exercise to do with your kids and your grandkids. Show them how they're attacking your weakness as a fallen human being in order to try to get you sucked in and become discontented with life where it is. Come thou fount of every blessing, has this in the third verse. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above. And listen, this isn't just a recent problem. This goes all the way back to the time of Solomon, 900 BC. There's actually evidence to show us that this has been an ongoing problem in the human heart for all the ages. I don't know if you remember Pompeii. That was the place in Italy, isn't it? Pompeii in Italy? Pompeii in Italy, where the volcano erupted and people's entire lifestyle was encased instantaneously. There's actually, people's expressions on their faces have been encased in volcanic ash because it came on them so quickly that even the facial expressions in their eyes and everything else is encased in the actual molten, whatever material it is that comes on them. There's an absolutely fascinating story of one woman who was encased in the lava from Pompeii, her feet are headed to the city gate like she's trying to flee as quickly as possible. But she's turned around like this, grasping, and later, as they completed the unearthing, found pearls that just below her fingers. So as she was fleeing Pompeii, she was reaching for these pearls that someone else had dropped. Get out of there! Do we understand that we're in positions many times in our life where we need to flee? We need to just get away from this situation. It's way too tempting. They're strumming at the discontented chords of your life, trying to get you sucked into the world and the flesh and the devil. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Number 3, there is no contentment in striving against God. No kidding. Look what it says, verses 10 through 12. Whatever exists has already been named, and what man is has been known. No man can contend with one who is stronger than he. The more the words, the less the meaning, and how does that profit anyone? For who knows what is good for a man in life during the few and meaningless days he passes through like a shadow? Who can tell him what will happen under the sun after he is gone? Listen, folks, God holds all the cards. There's one commentator who said he not only holds all the cards, but he owns the casino and the lottery and the little, what are those one-armed bandit things? Slot machines. Sorry, when we flew into Vegas, we just went to the Grand Canyon. You said, Pastor Keith went to Vegas? You have evil minds. What was my point? God owns all the cards. He owns the casino. All the games are rigged. Because he wants you to come to himself. wants you to understand what a good and gracious God He is. He wants you to understand His patience and His mercy. He wants you to understand what you would be missing in your life if you really got your way and kicked Him out of your life. There's a great story that my professor in seminary told me about a woman in his church who had just was coming back from the hospital in which her 12-year-old child had died in the hospital. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning. She had been up for the last 36 hours trying to be there for her child who was struggling to live. Her husband had lost his job, and he was off in another city at the time trying to find another job. So here she is all alone, caring for her child who just recently passed away. She's driving home from the hospital, just madder than blazes at God, just weeping and crying, and her heart is absolutely wrenched. She pulls into the driveway, and for the next 30 minutes just screams at God. How could you allow this to happen? We've served you all of our lives. We've done all these. And she's crying and she's broken and she's hurting and she doesn't have anybody to share this with. And for 30 minutes, she just spews the venom out of her mouth and then collapses with her head against the steering wheel. And then in her heart, she hears God say, well, I'm glad you got that out. And I'm glad you're at least talking to me because it's been 2 years since you have. And I love you. God is bigger than the egos that we think will drive Him away. Pastor Dave and Pastor Jody and myself quite often talk about special cases in kids club and youth group. Somehow I feel you know what I'm talking about. And listen, we have limited personnel, we have liability issues to wrestle with, and now you really know what I'm talking about. And there's a lot of considerations that go on. How far do you go to extend mercy and grace? Do you understand that God has none of those limitations? His patience never runs out until we run out. Until we become irredeemable. And that's the place God doesn't want any of us to come. And that's why He puts incidents and events in our lives to drive us back to Him. Not because He's mean and just sits up there going, It's because God loves you dearly and wants the best for you. The problem we have is we don't understand what it's going to take in order for us to grow up and become mature. We don't understand the process that needs to take place. We think we know what it's going to take in order for us to be content. Haven't you proven yourself over and over again? You don't have a clue what it means to be content. I know I've proved it to myself. Everything that I've chased in my life that was outside of God, that I thought I would find contentment in, has been absolutely squat. Been empty. I could tell you 100 stories of things that I've chased. Here's my conclusion. How does a relationship with Christ bring us the contentment we seek? A, only God can bring contentment, and Christ is the bridge back to God. I have a quote. I think this made the sermon outline. Contentment is a gift from God to be gratefully received, not a triumph of self-discipline or acquisition to be obtained. Here's the quote by C.S. Lewis. I think this made the cut too. Did it make it cut, baby? Okay, C.S. Lewis says this quote. God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from Himself because it is not there. There is no such thing. It's like saying you want to become a great baseball star and not have a mitt and bat. You don't understand baseball. It's like saying you want to become a great NASCAR driver and never learn how to drive. You have no clue what it means to be a great NASCAR driver. And that's why we have to seek the God of the universe if we ever want to find contentment, because it doesn't exist anywhere else. You can only find it in Him. Come thou long expected Jesus, born to set thy people free. From our fears and sins release us. Let us find our rest in thee. Israel's strength and consolation, hope of all the earth thou art. dear desire of every nation, joy of every beating heart. Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled. A couple quotes that I have in your sermon outline that you really, really ought to commit to memory. Our hearts are restless until we find our rest in thee, O Lord. St. Augustine said that 1,600 years ago. It's still as true today as it was then. And the other one from Blaise Pascal, there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man which cannot be filled by any other created thing, but only by God the Creator made known through Jesus. B, contentment is something that must be learned by the Spirit of Christ and being discontented with the world, our flesh, and the devil. That's what the Apostle Paul had to say in the text that Buddy read a little bit earlier in the service. You have to learn to be content. It will not come to you by osmosis. It will not come to you by default. You have to think through what it means to be discontented. You need to think through your life experiences. You need to think through what the God of the universe is offering you. You need to think through how this world ends up being all empty and futile and meaningless. And if you don't take the effort to do that, you'll never learn what it means to be content in Jesus. There's a great quote by Steve Farrar. He was big into focus on the family and men's ministry about 20 years ago. Here's what he says. Looking deep inside yourself to find life's answers is like going scuba diving in a septic tank. Isn't that a great graphic? Can you picture that? You can't. Someone help Mark. He can't picture it yet. Looking for life's answers within yourself is like going scuba diving in a septic tank. They're not there, and all you'll get is, well, you know what you'll get. Here's a quote by Dale Carnegie. It isn't what you have or who you are or where you are or what you are doing that makes you happy or unhappy. It's what you think about. That's why we're to commit our thoughts to the God of the universe. That's why we're to have the transformation or the renewing of our minds by looking at the grace and mercies of God. I beseech you, therefore, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to allow your minds to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and perfect and acceptable will of God. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed so that you can find out who God is and what he's done for you. Here's Martha Washington. I bet you didn't know you're going to come and hear Martha Washington this morning. The greater part of our happiness or misery depends upon our dispositions and not upon our circumstances. And this one by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was in a Soviet gulag for about 20 years of his life and then finally was set free, and that I think has become a very, very prophetic voice to the West that we've ignored. He says this, a man is happy so long as he chooses to be happy. But you know why I think a lot of us don't choose to be happy? Is because we like the victim mentality and the sympathy that we can generate from others by all of the, my life is so terrible. Really? That's what you want? That's what you're going to find your satisfaction and happiness is sympathy because you've portrayed yourself as a victim? Boy, have I caught myself doing that a lot. And you know what happens every time I recognize it in myself? I feel dirty. I feel like a hooker. How do I know that? Maybe I'll take that part out. But I do. I feel like I've taken something from someone else for my own selfish gain and means, not really concerned about the other person at all. C, contentment is trusting submission to God. Trusting submission to God. Look what it says in Psalm 125, verse 10. Those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be shaken, but endures forever. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. What was really fascinating about beginning in Huntington, Indiana with youth ministry there is that all the kids wanted to go to Disney World. And in fact, we did go to Disney World. We used to have reward trips. They would earn money and do different projects, do service organizations, that kind of stuff. And they would earn the money to go wherever they said they wanted to go, but we set up criteria they had to meet in order to go there. And they said, we want to go to Disney World. And we're like, yeah, right. Like, you're gonna. And they did. They earned enough money and they earned the right to be able to go. And we went to Disney World. You know what I found out when I moved to Florida to go to seminary about the youth group that I was in charge of in Florida? Guess where they wanted to go? Cedar Point. Talk about a wake-up call about the discontentedness of our hearts. They have Disney World in their backyard. We were, 10 miles away from Disney World? Maybe 15. It was just in our backyard. We lived in St. Cloud. You know, St. Cloud, Kissimmee? That's actually Kissimmee, St. Cloud. But we lived in a little bit east of St. Cloud, but we lived right there. I mean, a lot of the people in the church we were at worked at Disney World. It's right there. We thought for sure they wanted to go. No, we don't want to go to Disney World. I thought, what does this say about humankind? That we're never content with what we have. We're never content with what God puts in our backyard. Here's a quote from Tim Keller that I think is absolutely amazing. Wouldn't it be great if God always gave you what you would have asked for if you knew everything he knows? Now, I'll give you a chance to write this down. Wouldn't it be great if God always gave you, this is, by the way, it didn't make the cut, so it's not in your sermon outline. Wouldn't it be great if God always gave you what you would have asked for if you knew everything he knows? And then the quote finishes like this. We have a God like that. Wouldn't it be great if God always gave you what you would have asked for if you knew everything he knows? We do. Get this quote. This one I think did make your sermon outline. Contentment. Realizing that God has provided everything I need for my present happiness. We are a sad people. And the reason we're sad is because we don't know Jesus nearly as well as we should. My spiritual challenge is this. I reversed the order on these this week. No, this is not a misprint. This is on purpose. My spiritual challenge is this. Endeavor to submit to the truth that God alone can give you peace, rest, and contentment. And then strive to enter God's rest. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but it's perfectly rational. Strive to enter God's rest. Endeavor to submit to God, who alone can give you the peace, rest, and contentment that you seek. My worship point is this. Worship the one who brings you life, peace, and contentment. You're a fool if you don't. I'd like to close with a real quick story about my grandmother and then give you a Christmas text memory verse. My grandmother was an amazing lady. She was a pastor's wife. In fact, is Marv here today? Marv Scholl knows my grandmother because Marv was a UB pastor's son as well. I don't know if you knew Marv was a PK, but my grandmother was a pastor's wife. My mom was a PK. And she didn't have much. In fact, pastors back in the 40s and 50s didn't make much money at all. They had the idea, I remember this coming up in a board meeting. I was sitting in my board meeting because my mom wasn't home. My dad made me go. I told you I had a drug problem. Drug me to church. They drugged me to Sunday night. They even drugged me to the board meetings. But I remember sitting and hearing a discussion among the leaders, well, we need to keep our pastors poor so that they'll remain humble. And they did a good job of doing that. My grandmother had nothing. She retired in Bradenton, Florida, and my parents went down there during the winter months just to be with her while she was still alive. In fact, my dad still goes down as a result of just the habit of going down. But I remember visiting her a couple of times. Jean might remember the trailer that she lived in had holes in the floor, and rats would come up and periodically eat her food supplies. The trailer, I think, at that time cost like $2,000 or $3,000. I can't remember now how much it was, but it was absolutely just a dump. But it's all she had. But she was always happy. I remember going and visiting her at the nursing home. They brought her back north, and she stayed at the Linwood Manor, which was right across from the Bixby Hospital to the east. And her nature was so embedded with satisfaction and contentment that even though she didn't know who she was and didn't know where she was and didn't know anything else, she was just so content and so happy and wanting to serve. I remember visiting one of the last times I visited her. She says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't have things ready for dinner." And I go, "Grandma, you don't have to worry about that." "Who are you?" "I'm your grandson, Keith." "Well, that's nice. You seem like a nice boy." Where did she get that? I'll tell you where she got it. She got it by looking to Jesus, the author and perfecter of her faith. It didn't matter what she had or didn't have. She was at peace and content because she knew what real value was. And we've lost it. I've lost it. I know in my head, but it takes a lot to learn to put it in your heart. And I'm getting better. I really am. I was talking to Brad earlier today. I'm getting to the point now where I start to look at material things as being a real hassle. Because you got to maintain those stupid things. And I told you last week, I'm already planning on going to the nursing home. And what I will and won't keep. So my list of things that I need is getting shorter every year. I'm letting attrition take over. I'm looking forward to the day where I need nothing but Christ and Him crucified. That, my friends, is freedom. Let's pray. God, you tell us in the Christmas story, glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace to men on whom your favor rests. And Father, I really believe we don't enjoy the peace because we're not willing to accept the favor. We're not willing to accept the conditions of what it takes for us to extend our hands and receive your peace because now we're not willing to accept you. God, help us. Help us to be like my grandma, who can find peace and contentment with absolutely nothing but knowing that you're there. And yet you'll never leave us nor forsake us. And you'll make us more than conquerors. So it doesn't matter who's against us. If you're for us, that's all that matters. God, help us to find that. Because that's where real power, real peace, real contentment, real satisfaction lies. Because it can never be taken away. It can never be threatened. God, help us to discover these things. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.